Are you working on your author career but struggling to get that first book published? Does the goal of being an author seem too lofty? Or thoughts of having multiple books and making a full-time living are as fantastical as living in Cinderella's castle? Welcome to Discovered Wordsmiths, a podcast where aspiring authors can be heard. Join Stephen Schneider as he finds and talks to authors you may not know, but authors that have gotten their foot on the author career path. Hear what they've done to get there and where they want to go now. Settle back. It's time for a bit of inspiration and advice. Come listen to today's Discovered Wordsmith.
All right, so let's move on to some author talk.
Okay.
Before we get on to a good topic about the podcast and radio, tell me a little bit about some things. You're on book 13. What are you doing different? What have you learned over 13 books?
Well, actually, I'm on book 15.
Okay, 15. So in the time we've talked, you've gotten 2 more books out. Yeah.
Well, no, the Hunter series is 13. Then we have, 15. And actually, I have a poetry book thrown in there, too.
Okay. So what have you learned over the series?
How to relax and let the stuff flow. I don't try to shove stuff in that doesn't belong.
That's
a great lesson to learn, and it's a hard lesson to learn.
Yes, I agree.
And but I now have learned that if the story isn't coming to me easily, move on to another story. Maybe come back to that one. Maybe not. It just depends. So
now, you mentioned letting it flow, don't putting in things that don't belong. It's interesting you say that because you mentioned you're a musician. I also have played music most of my life, not as much anymore. I'm getting back into it. But I was just chatting with some old bandmates and we were talking U2 and about how the bassist is very subtle in what he plays. His bass lines are not complex. They're not all over the place, and he leaves room for the rest of the music to breathe, and that's rare.
Right.
And we were just commenting, and that's a skill in any creative endeavor. Same with a painting, music, writing.
Right.
So it's interesting you say that. I like that.
Well, I used to play bass.
So that's what I play. I love bass. All right.
Yeah, I had an old Fender P bass.
Oh,
pre 64 CVS.
Oh man, those are the best.
Oh my God, it was such a clean instrument. It just played so fine. But mostly we did the band I played in at the time. It was a rock. Well, I played in 2 bands. This was a one set rock group that we put together for shows only. It was called Back Talking.
Okay.
And I played bass, and in fact, when they put together the band, a guy named Irish McKinney said, "You're a bass player." And I said,
"That's how I got it."
I said, "I don't play bass," and he goes, "You do now."
These are the strings. Here's the frets. 1, 2, 3,
so
4.
A friend of mine kind of gave me the basics, and from there I took it on. And
that's so funny.
I was already a really good finger picker and a really good guitarist, so picking up the bass wasn't that difficult.
Right.
But I also
the band was in. We were all musicians. I played piano. Most of us played piano. We'd been in band together for 8 years. So, yeah.
I played that too. I played piano, banjo, bass, guitar,
nice.
6 and 12.
Well, I'm working on guitar. Those little strings are so close together. It's hard for me.
They are. And I too am trying to get back into it. In fact, I haven't played in about 4 years, and I lost all my calluses. So
yeah.
Now I'm gonna pick up a classical guitar because I'm a wuss.
Right.
And
right.
I want the nylon strings.
Yeah, something that's like gonna rip your fingers apart.
Exactly.
So when you're writing, Jim, what do you use to write? What software services? What's your writing preferences?
I just use a desktop computer and Word.
Okay.
I just use Word. I pre-format my pages to kind of give me an idea where I'm at.
What do you
we
mean
write everything in 6x9.
Okay.
I just pre-size them. So I always know where I'm at in each page, and so so I never have to worry about, okay, how many pages have I got now? Because I'm on 8.5 by 11.
Right.
12 point Times New Roman. Double space. Now I don't do that. We ask our writers to do that. I don't do that.
Right.
But I just use Word, and I upgrade it whenever upgrades come. I just keep
Yeah, yeah,
word
they
constant.
pretty much automatic now.
Yeah, yeah, and it's one of the best word processors out there, so you might as well just use it. So,
And
but that's what I
what do you
use.
do to market your books?
Well, we do we have a little marketing section on our website. In fact, Richard's working on that today. There's a little store on the website which will be opening probably I think this weekend. We do Facebook. We do through we do press releases through Mickey and word of mouth. If you're not willing to go out there and shamelessly self promote, don't write.
Right.
You know, and don't give up your day job. For God's sake, don't give up your day job.
Right.
You know,
Yep.
if you think you're gonna write a book and get paid, I got a hot flash for you.
Well, you might get paid. It's just not going to
Maybe.
be the gold bathtub pay.
Well, see, I hit a home run with Jonah Blue because Jonah Blue got picked up by two colleges in LA, and they use it in their history courses because of the research I did in
Wow.
Mountain Men.
That's
So
awesome.
that's, but that's rare, you know,
Right.
and that's 80 books a semester. So
It's something that's nice.
it's respectable.
Yeah. So I got to ask, is that a rifle in the background? It looks like a long barrel something. It's hard to
Right
see.
here,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a Kentucky rifle.
Nice.
That good story with that is my best friend. I met him in Vietnam in 1969, and he was in the Marines and I was in the Army, and we have remained friends to this day. He was a rifle maker called Fox Bluff Rifle Works in Tennessee, and I got the very first rifle he made 100% in his shop, board the barrel, everything.
Wow.
And that I have the first one and I have the last one. That's the last one. My
Nice.
son
That's pretty
has the
cool.
first one. But he made the rifles for the three main characters of Last of the Mohicans.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh,
and
nice.
he delivered them to South or North Carolina where they were filming the movie, and um, each principal got two identical rifles to use, and at the end of filming, they were going to present one to each character, and they were all gone. They were stolen, all six rifles.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I know,
Ugh.
$60,000 worth of rifles ripped.
Ooh.
These
Wow.
those rifles were 10 grand a piece,
Wow.
but that's a lot of work.
That's a lot of work. Yeah.
Because he did everything in his shop. He did everything, poured the steel. I mean, he just did everything. The man
That's
was the
pretty cool.
magician when it came to
That,
guns.
that's we were talking creativity and stuff. There's another, that's very creative to with weapons
Absolutely.
and rifles and any of that metalwork, woodwork, and all of that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Agent Orange got to us,
Mm.
and he has developed Alzheimer's, and so he lives in Nebraska now, and he's slowly going away. And
That's
you know, it is what it is, I guess. Anyway,
so.
no more.
Anyway, let's move on to author discussion of topic of interest. You also run a podcast, and
I
it is
do.
part of a radio show.
It
So
is.
tell everybody a little bit about that whole setup and what you do for the podcast.
We have a live radio show that goes out weekly at 6 p.m. Pacific time on LA Talk Radio. It is a .com. It's an internet radio station, but we go out live, and it is we talk to authors, screenwriters, playwrights, songwriters. We talk to anyone who has anything to do with the written word, and our show is 50 minutes, and it's our guest is the entire show. We don't cut them short ever. Well, we did last week because the guy who wrote our opening music was an old musician friend of mine, Rick Gilman, and he passed away the day before the show last week.
Oh,
Oh yeah, but he had generously donated two pieces of music to open our show with, and so and I'd known Rick for 42 years. So
wow.
anyway, but we don't skimp on the writer. We let them talk about what they want to talk about. We try to get them to give away their trade secrets, like what what's your what would you like to write? You know, What's your favorite time to write?
Right.
What do you do if you get writer's block, and how do you get out of it? Just your process. What's your process?
Okay.
Because we give our show towards new writers. So, I mean, new writers, a lot of them listen.
I
You
like
know,
that because that's what this is focused on. New writers, writers
right,
that aren't on the USA bestseller or hobnobbing with Stephen King on the weekends and stuff.
right, right. We deal with New York Times bestsellers. We deal with world known bestseller writers. We've had, like I said earlier, John Sanford's been on the show. Craig Johnson's been on the
Nice.
show. Um, we've had the Pulitzer Prize winners on the show.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and my wife does all the booking, and we have them. We're booked now through March of next year,
Wow.
so I can't quit.
Right.
You know.
You got to keep going. So, why did you choose to do something like this as opposed to
um,
anything else?
well, my co-host, my original sole co-host, Bobby Jean Bell, she had a show on around the town, around the county, um, in Santa Clarita, California. And every time came out with a new book, she would have me on her show, and we would discuss the new book. And then they canceled her show, or around the barn. I'm sorry. Then they canceled her show. So we got together 2-3 weeks later, and over some. Well, everything gets done over margaritas and chips and salsa. That's the way of the world.
Right.
Well, we sat around with some margaritas and chips and salsa, and thought, well, you know what? I said, look, Bobby Jean, I said, why don't we start a radio show of our own and call it The Writer's Block? And we can get it on LA Talk Radio. I've already talked to Sam, who owns the station, and he's more than agreed to let us come in and take up an hour of his week. And we put it together, and we started the show. It started 4 months later.
Wow. Yeah. That's kind of how most of them seem. That's what this was. I was thinking about it, thinking about it. And then I finally just told my son, I said, hey, you've got a book out. Let's just do an interview, see how it goes, and I'll go from there. Next thing I
Right.
know, it's 2 years later.
Exactly. And it takes, sometimes you have so much trepidation. Do I pull the trigger? Do I not pull the trigger?
Right.
Is this going to be any good?
Right. Yes.
And that's the main thing. And well, it turns out that it is good, and people love it, and the writers love it, because we get to talk about things that they don't get to talk about. And one of the things
Oh,
that
that's
we
cool.
do that most shows don't do, nothing against you, Steve,
But
but
I'm going to say something against you here.
no, 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 no. But we made a commitment that every guest that is on our show, we read their book.
Okay. Got it.
I read a book a week for a writer that's going to be on my show.
And
And I don't always read for enjoyment. In fact, none of us read them for enjoyment.
we
We read them
have
to see.
to.
Well, yeah, no, we read them to see what their writing styles are like, and so we can ask pertinent questions.
Right. And
You know,
I,
go ahead.
I understand and appreciate that totally. And that's something I know a lot of my author friends talk about wanting to do a podcast, or some of them do it and some of them hesitate. They're not sure. It's work. It's not uh, always, oh, it's a half hour each week. No, there's other things you got to do.
Oh,
There's maintenance. And that's one of the things I knew I couldn't do because I have a day job. I have my own writing. I have a family. I still wanted to do the podcast as a writer service. It's a
uh-huh.
niche I saw it needed. I felt I could do this to offer to other writers and help them.
Sure.
But I knew I could not read a book a week and do everything else I was doing. So I just didn't make that commitment, which is not good or bad. It's just different. And I think
Right. Well,
writers need
sure.
to think about that.
Right, yeah, I mean, and we want them to just relax and have a good time on our show.
Right.
We tell them, look, because I call every writer the Tuesday before their show is on, and we talk about the show. Have you listened to it? If not, you may want to listen to at least one episode before the show goes on the air
Right.
on Thursday. Kind of get a feel of what we do. I mean, because it's primarily kind of like controlled chaos. And because we have three people that are distinct personalities that are co-hosts, and all of us have good senses of humor, and all of us we'll just jump all over each other. Never our writers, but each other we do all the time. And but yeah, we have fun, and I mean, I'll sit here sometimes if I'm having a croaky day. I'll have a glass of bourbon in front of me. We recommend, look, if you're going to be on my show on Thursday, grab a glass of wine. Sit down, relax, have fun. We're your friends. We're in your back porch. We're just BSing.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
all we're doing,
And
and that's how the show is.
so why, and I'm asking you this, I have my own answers. Why make a decision to spend your time talking to people, recording, putting a podcast out, and that doesn't make money? Because these usually don't make too much money unless you get some sponsors after 1,000 shows or something. Why
Right.
choose to do that?
Well, we have sponsors.
So, okay.
We're sponsored by LA Talk Radio.
Okay.
Is one of our sponsors. Creative Edge Publicity is another one of our sponsors.
With Mickey.
And Black Dog Publishing, Tuscany Bay Books is another one of our sponsors. Of
So
course,
it
you
does
can't.
help get out your publishing a little bit.
Absolutely, we get everything out. And if we want to talk about a new book we got coming out, it's our show. We can do that.
Right.
you know, so but no, you don't make money at that. It's strictly a service to the writer.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you know that, and we have a good time with them. We only had one writer that was really bad. It was just, I mean, his writing was phenomenal. His writing was exceptional, but his wife had died 2 weeks before he was on the air, and all he could do was talk about his dead wife. Oh my
Oh,
God, for an hour. I wanted to shoot myself in the head.
uh,
Oh, and romance novels. Oh, we had like 7 in a row.
ooh.
Oh my God! And I told. Well, my wife is the one who books our show. She's known as the bookie. I said, you one more romance novel. I'm going to go in the bathroom and shoot myself in the head. I'm just going to. I can't read another romance novel because they're all the same.
Well,
They're
yeah.
they're they're formulaic, and it's handsome guy, beautiful woman. Have sex, don't have sex, get pissed off, leave, come back, have more sex. You know, it's like they send out this big long thing, and the women just fill in the blanks.
Right.
Change the name to protect the innocent.
But there's something to be said for that too. That's what people want. The readers
Yeah,
of that style.
absolutely. Well, the women, especially
Yeah.
because you can get through them in a hurry.
Right. Yeah. And they eat them up. So
Yep.
more power to you if you can write that style and fit in.
Hey,
So do you have you thought of, like you said, you haven't a whole year's worth of people booked, so obviously it's popular. You're helping out the writers. Do you listen to many other podcasts yourself?
I do when they send them to me.
Okay.
I do. And when I go on their websites before I put them on the show, if they have a podcast, I'll listen to maybe one or two of them, kind of get an idea where they are. If they'll send it to me, Mickey will send me a podcast to listen to. Before the writers are on our show. So yeah, we do listen to other podcasts, but there are so many podcasts.
Yeah.
You can't cater to them all. So I mean,
Exactly.
where do you draw the line?
Yeah, and that's a definite consideration if someone wants to start a podcast.
Right.
How do you fit in? What's your, and I don't want to say angle, but you got to have that some
You have
reason.
to have a niche.
Yeah.
And if you don't, then don't do the podcast because it's just another thing.
Yeah.
You know, ours is live. It goes out live, which is unique in our industry. But the podcast is available the next day if you want to download it and listen. And then Richard, because we do everything on Skype, because I want to see who I'm talking to, like we are right now.
Right.
So we do everything on Skype, and then Richard records the entire show, and then he puts commercial breaks and all kinds of funny little crap in there, and we have a video that goes out as well.
Right.
So we have we have the live show, the podcast, and a video.
So you chose to do an interview type of show because that's the other consideration.
Right.
I know some people listen to interview shows, but there's craft podcasts and there's
right.
the various styles and what you can do and learn. So with 13, 15 books, you could have done a craft one. You could have done one where you focus on writing and craft,
Right.
more like Joanna Penn or something, where she has a lot of that, but also some interviews. What was there any big thinking, like let's do interviews with new authors as opposed to craft and publishing. You could have done that too.
Well, we do a couple of those shows a year.
Okay.
We do a publishing show. In fact, we just had one last September. We had one. It turned out really, really good. Um, and we like I said, we do a couple of those a year. We're going to have another one, I think, in July this year.
Okay.
We're having another one on strictly in publishing, and yeah, oh no, we do get into that. But I want to give these authors also a chance, especially new authors, to come in and kind of talk. Well, authors love to talk about themselves. I mean, let's face it. So, if you can get them talking, you've won the battle.
Right. You mentioned the author, and I'm not blaming him, not his fault. He was in a bad headspace to be doing an interview talking about his wife. Totally get that.
Right,
But for me, I put some recommendations on my website because you always get those new authors. And I understand. I have a lot of authors who say, I have never been on a podcast or interviewed. I'm so nervous,
right,
and I get a lot of that because they're new authors. That's kind of the
right,
idea.
right.
But that would be my biggest advice is relax and just chat, because I'll say,
Yeah,
so tell me a little bit about yourself. Well, I've always wanted to write. My first book is about this, and then it does this, and they tell me the whole story in like 10 minutes about their book, and then they
right.
look at me and I'm like, well, I hope you have a great day. It's like, where do I go? You got to try and catch it. It's like, just relax a little bit. People
Yeah,
read books as much for the book as they do the author. And when you're on an interview, they want to know the author. So if they
right.
like you, they'll read the book. Uh,
Absolutely,
so
absolutely. Well, it also helps if you have a good book.
well, yeah, that does
It's
help.
it's funny you bring that up because I was on another interview on Monday with Jennifer Perry, Madame Perry's whatever it is, salon, I think it's what it's called, and she said, "So tell me about you know, can a bad writer write a good book?" I said, "Sure. A good writer can write a piece of crap too.
Yeah.
It's all going to depend where their brain is when they sit down at the typewriter or they sit down at the keyboard."
And that's very subjective too. A lot of people hate Stephen King. A lot of people hate Tolkien. Long drawn out descriptions. I like some of that. What I don't like is King's endings most of the time.
Yeah, I gave up on Stephen King after The Shining.
Oh wow, The Shining is one of my top three books of all time.
Oh, me too. Me too. Salem's Lot too is right up there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I have learned and one of the things that I did learn in writing is that you can be very descriptive and not be page long.
Yes.
Sometimes all it takes is a short paragraph,
Yes.
and if it works that way, don't make it flowery because if you make it flowery, you're going to lose your reader.
Yeah. Everybody has a style that they get captured.
Exactly.
I just got into reading Lee Child, Jack Reacher, which I'd never picked up before. I'm not a
Great
huge
books.
thriller reader, but I saw the TV show and I loved it. So I'm like, okay, now I got to read the book. And his style is so different from most everything else I read. There's short sentences, there's not a lot of flowery descriptions or anything.
Nope.
And it's just moving on, moving on, moving on, and he still gets 300-page books that I'm like just wanting to read. So
Yeah, I like it when I'm reading an author and their chapters are like 2 or 3 pages
yes, and he
because
does
it
that a
it
lot.
allows me to kind of take a breath and move on to the next chapter.
It very much fits the new the revival of the serial type fiction. It's
Exactly.
similar to that.
We just did one with Bob Brill, he's a radio announcer in L.A. on KNXT Radio, a CBS affiliate, and he's a very good friend of ours and very good friend of mine. And we just did one of his books for Tuscany Bay called "The Tattoo Murders," and he does that. But his chapters and his chapter breaks are dates, times, and places.
Okay,
Instead of star star star,
right.
it's a date, time, and a
Time and
place.
place. Nice.
So, you know, and he's very descriptive without being overly descriptive. I mean, the guy described a guy sliced to ribbons. I mean, to a T. You know, in half a page. So
There's a good skill to that.
yeah, there's a root, but he also writes westerns, and we've done some of his stuff too. So,
Okay.
but
Let me ask you another question I thought of for the podcast. So you do a radio show. It's
right,
live, and it turns it into a podcast. I know my son used to do one of those. He'd do a radio show every week, and they'd turn it into a podcast.
right.
How is that different from like what I'm doing, where I just put it out as a podcast? What are the differences for people?
Well, the difference is when you're doing a live radio show, anything's liable to happen. I mean, and has. We've tried to call guests before that don't answer their phone. And it's like, so you just talk over it, you just keep going. You can't stop.
Right.
Things happen on live radio that you can edit some of it out if you want if it turns into a podcast, which is
Right.
nice.
Right.
If you happen to get started late, it doesn't matter when the podcast, because the podcast will start when you hit play.
Right.
So I mean, there's editing mostly. I think is what most the difference is in the editing.
And you also have to have that definite commitment because you have a time frame every week. You're sitting
50
down to do
minutes,
it. I
and
mean,
we stick to it.
if you have a hard time sitting down every day at 6 to write, then you're probably not going to be able to sit down every night at 8 p.m. to do a podcast or do a radio show.
Right. Well, when we first started 7 years ago, our first hours were 8 to 9 or 8 to 8:50, and then they offered us a 7 o'clock slot, and then they offered us a 6 o'clock slot. So I said, well, don't get me any lower than 6 o'clock because we will get no listeners.
Right.
But yeah, and when we hit 6 o'clock slot, man, just thing took off like a scalded cat. Because now people were available to listen.
Right. I know.
Without cutting into their TV time.
Right.
Without cutting into their TV time. See,
There's a
that's the deal.
There's a really popular paranormal radio show podcast, Coast to Coast AM.
Yeah, with George Noory.
Yeah, they're on like midnight to 2 a.m. my time.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
Yeah, I know a couple of friends have been on there.
Yeah, we had a writer that was on there. He is, I think his, what was his name? Bruce Solheim.
Okay.
He was Bruce Solheim. He wrote a paranormal book that we did years ago, and in fact, he was the very first book we did. Is Tuscany Bay, and without doing our own. And he was on Coast to Coast, and he's been on a lot of the paranormal shows.
Oh.
Although I didn't think his book was that paranormal, but that's my opinion.
Got it.
And he had to do a lot of rewrites. Oh yeah. He had a lot of redundancies in his sentences, and he's a professor. And I said, Bruce, you should know better.
Teacher, professor, English doesn't necessarily mean the craft of writing.
It does not, and people don't get that. Oh, he's a history or he's an English teacher. Why doesn't he know that? Because he's not a writer.
Right.
There's a difference.
Right. Yep. And just because you have a misplaced comma or a bad word choice in a book doesn't make it a bad story. And people want the story. They're much more willing to overlook a few errors, if they even notice.
Right. And if I had to give any advice to a new writer,
that was going to be my next question.
If I had to give any advice to a new writer, my first bit of advice would be write your dialogue to match your character. You have to write your dialogue to match your character. Things don't need to be said correctly. Things don't need to be punctuated correctly in dialogue.
Yes.
Editors don't get that. A lot of them
I was just going to say, I've had to argue my editor a couple of times on dialogue.
Don't touch my dialogue. Edit the content of the book, but don't mess with my dialogue.
Right.
And if you're writing an accent, if you're writing like an Irishman, you can write the accent into the dialogue without having to be overly Irish. You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If you say, for instance, I have a character in one of my in The Return. His name is Kieran O'Connell, and he ran away from the 14th British Grenadiers in Africa, and wound up in Louisiana. He doesn't know how, or doesn't remember getting there. He just remembers he's there. And this guy, Jeff Stryker's holding him at gunpoint because he just popped up out of the grass, scared the living crap out of him. And so he says, well, would you mind me putting down your gun, mate? so I can get me fucking kid out of the grass. Well, if you spell it out that way, that's exactly how you're going to read it.
Right, right.
So you don't need to put an Irish accent in it, and especially if you're reading for an audiobook. Richard and I had such a problem getting this guy who did a Western that we wrote together to don't do a Western accent. Don't do a Southern accent. The accents are written into the dialogue. Leave it alone. But so that would be the biggest bit of advice I could give to a writer is make your dialogue match your character.
Yeah. I've got an author friend, Jeff Elkins. He calls himself the dialogue doctor, and he works by his day job is computer programming AIs with dialogue for learning systems. So he works with authors on their dialogue for books and focuses on that to help exactly what you just said. Make sure your character and dialogue match, and that not every character sounds the same. That's another huge hard thing to do.
And people cut people off. And you can write that into dialogue.
Yeah.
But if a ... means that somebody's just cut you off, okay. And you don't always need to put he said, she said at the end of a quote.
Right.
It's just little tricks that you learn, and as you write, just keep writing, keep working on your dialogue.
Yep, agreed. All right. Well, Jim, I appreciate you taking some time talking to me today about your book and some radio podcasting. And I hopefully everyone will go check out the radio show or the podcast.
I hope so.
Yeah. All right.
I hope so.
Great. I hope you have a great rest of your day in Idaho.
You do as well.
Thank you.
You do as well, Stephen. Take care, my friend.
I hope so. It's
you know what? If you'll send me an email, jimchristina@yahoo.com.
Yes.
Send me your address. I will send you a signed copy of the return of Jefferson's Chance, a hardbound.
Nice. I will do so.
And maybe a copy of my poetry book as well.
Okay. I'm up for it.
I'll sign that one too.
Nice. All right, Jim.
All right, hey, pal. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Discovered Wordsmiths. Come back next week and listen to another author discuss the road they've traveled, and maybe, sometime in the near future, it might be you.